Would true damage negate the stat squish? I should probably just pull out my spreadsheet for this, shouldn't I? Okay. So there. Nikke damage calculator. There we go. So I've already explained the damage formula a couple of times on stream. So let me just break down specifically where enemy defense actually enters into the damage formula. So this is enemy defense as a value that I have personally saved up for test dummy purposes. So the base damage is the base attack of the Nikke that multiplies all of the attack buffs, so all of these, and then you subtract to that the monster defense, so the rapture defense. And all of that, you multiply it by the weapon scale multiplier. This is why, as soon as we saw the Red Hood weapon multiplier change when she changed weapons, any theory crafter worth his salt knew that that was kneecapping Red Hood beyond measure. That it was a ridiculous nerf to the damage of Red Hood. Now, the monster defense enters here. It's just a flat subtraction to this. So if you were to apply it as true damage, so for example in this case, right? So let me just check real quick that my monster defense on this side isn't... yeah, so it is an equal thing. So if I were to make this monster defense 0 here, for example, it would be a 5% damage increase. Reducing the monster defense of 13k to 0 is a 5% increase. 5.5 if you want to round it a little bit. And if you really, really want to round it, let's just round it to 6%, give or take. 6% give or take damage increase. The only places where you would see a substantial enough damage increase would be if you grabbed notoriously tanky stuff from past solo raids. Like, notoriously tanky stuff. So shout out to Nikke GG for having these type of stats. It's always nice to be able to come here and check these. It's stuff that I use for my theory crafts at times. Hello? Can you load in, please? Nikke GG, hello. Did they remove it or what? Hello? That's the wrong mother whale. Hold on. That's the wrong mother whale. So it should be... Union Raid. Oh, there we go. Solo Raid Mother Whale level 8. There we go. So a defense of 30,000. Okay, let's just change these to 30,000. Give or take. Let's just round it, right? So let's just change this to 30,000, right? And now we say that, okay, true damage to that would be a 13% damage increase, give or take. You have a question out of curiosity? Sure, yeah, feel free to ask. So this is what I mean by you would need notoriously and insanely tanky enemies to get value out of true damage. You would need insane levels of defense. You would need insane levels of defense to make use of it. If you look at things like, for example, in the Wikipedia at Laplace, currently the only true damage Nikkes that we have are Laplace, Clay, and what's her name? And Frima with her treasure. So let me just grab Laplace. So Laplace as a baseline has on her here. Affects the same enemy units when hero vision is fully stacked. Deals 11.9% of final attack as true damage. That's such a low multiplier. Now let's imagine we apply all the multipliers that we would get from things like Frima and from things like Clay. It would still be pretty small. And that would just do 13% extra damage over a regular attack that is not true damage. So do you wanna put, say, Clay, for example? Where's Clay? She should be in here. Yeah, there we go. So do you want to put something like Clay that... Okay, let's just look at her in the Wikipedia, because clearly this is not gonna... Okay, so Wikipedia. She's a B2 42nd. It's a very competitive slot too. Like 40-second on slot 2 as well is like super competitive. But what she does is increases true damage by 18% basically permanently. A little bit over 18% technically. Let's just say 20% give or take just for rounding purposes. She gives a small 20% attack buff continuously of her own attack buff. Reminder that she's a supporter, so there is a reduced thingy. She increases on burst on 40-second cooldown true damage by 12%. Like, unless there's something I am missing about the true damage formula, as in they would have a separate type of damage formula, if true damage follows the same damage formula but you just remove defense from it, this is too small. This is way too small. Like, you're sacrificing so much. I wouldn't be surprised that even though Laplace does 3 damage, you would rather run her with something like freaking Rem, right? I wouldn't be surprised because Rem provides massive attack buffs, even if they're based on caster attack. They provide extra ammunition. She does a fuck ton of damage herself, and she buffs her own attack as well. If she was 20 seconds, even at 20 seconds, the slot is just that competitive. You gotta remember that Clay, for the B2 slot, she's competing with cooldown reduction, with specialists, right? She's competing with generally ridiculously powerful Nikkes, right? She's competing with so much that if she's going to be a support specialist, right? So let's say like Leona, she's a support specialist. First and foremost, she would need a niche where she would be useful in. And 2, the support capabilities that she brings to the table need to shine enough to make it worthwhile. The problem with Clay, as I see it, is debuff immunity is okay. It's a nice little thing, but it's just whatever overall. 18%, like let's say 20% give or take here, and then let's say freaking another 12%, so 32% or so damage up. Where is it? Like 32% damage up, like, or damage amplification on it, does not go beyond what a lot of other Nikkes are capable of doing. So it just doesn't... Yo, MK, how's it going? It just feels like they did her a little bit dirty. Also, it's very hilarious that she has absolutely no synergy with her own squad mate, even though they're the duo cheerleader kind of thing. You gotta see it this way, right? Is that the niche she's supposed to be supporting is like hilariously tiny too. So if you go into the Wikipedia, into the favorite items, the other one besides Laplace is Frima. Through her, what's it called? Through the extra true damage that she does. For every 6 seconds, right? Or you can say it every 6 seconds, she does true damage with her normal attacks for 10 seconds. Which is basically 10 normal attacks, give or take. A little bit less than 10 normal attacks. You can say actually 9 normal attacks, give or take, every 7-ish seconds, give or take. So every 7 seconds, she does 9 attacks roughly that are true damage. And then she has this thing which is increases her true damage. This is way bigger than anything fucking Clay provides. Like, it's so insane. Like, the treasure on phase 2 alone provides more true damage buffs than Clay does in her entire kit. Like, did Shift Up even test their shit? And then you have, and by the way, she's 20 seconds. Like, this is what is absolutely fucking riveting about it, right? Is that if you look at Frima, she's 20 seconds. You're telling me that on one of the most competitive slots possible, which is the Burst 2 slot, they had to make Clay 40 seconds while providing hilariously low freaking damage advantages, when fucking Frima with her treasure on a 20-second provides more than than her entire kit in a single skill. Like, I mean, you get what I mean, right? Like, with a single skill on phase 2, Frima provides already more than almost Clay's entire kit. And then you have additionally on burst on a 20-second cooldown. Yeah. Even on 20 seconds, you probably wouldn't use Clay anyways. Even on 20 seconds, you probably wouldn't use Clay, just because of how competitive the B2 slot is. So I honestly, on this one, I'm actually very disappointed with Shift Up. I'm usually not a very negative person, right? I try to not be a negative Nancy or whatever with stuff. At least I try to. But on this one, they really dropped the ball. On this one, they absolutely dropped the ball. It's fucking ludicrous to look at the ratios and what Clay provides on a 40-second on the burst 2 slot, and you're looking at it and you're like, what did they test it on for it to make sense? Because you're not going to use her in PvP. You're clearly not going to use her on Union Raid, Solo Raid, Campaign. Where the fuck are you going to use her? Besides looking pretty in the freaking... on the main screen. Like, seriously. Like, what I gotta say though, right? So that people don't misunderstand what I mean. Not every Nikke has to be meta. Not every Nikke has to be meta. But there's something that I've talked about in the past. I'm a long-time Magic the Gathering player, right? So there is this concept that we have called the power curve. Let me just pull this out. It's probably going to be a bit boring, but I'll just try to make it very quickly. So, we have this concept in card games called the power curve. The power curve is impact versus the cost. So usually, a power curve, you would have a bunch of cards, or in this case, Nikkes. So how impactful are they? So you can replace cost with investment. How much do you need to invest versus how big of an impact she has? It's the same for League of Legends. It's the same for card games. It's the same for a lot of games. You will have characters, Nikkes, whatever you want to call them, all over the place, scattered over this, right? So for example, Alice is very high investment and very high impact, as an example. Whereas, for example, some other Nikke has not much investment and not much impact. Like, doesn't need much investment, but has like medium impact or whatever, right? And out of these, you can trace a curve, which is what we call the power curve. Now, if you're trying to make perfect imbalance, because if you try to make perfect balance, it means that you have to make just everything identical. That's the only way you can do it. If you try to make perfect imbalance, what you look at is, okay, some will be weak, some will be strong. Not everyone can be strong. That's just not feasible. But what you look at is the gap between them and the power curve, right? And ideally, you would want them to be, you know, around near the power curve. Even if they're not exactly on it and some are stronger and some are weaker or whatever, you want them to be somewhere around the power curve. The problem with Nikke, so I'm going to put Nikke in pink. The problem with Nikke is that you have a bunch of Nikkes fucking standing here. And a bunch of Nikkes standing fucking here. With gaps so hilariously wide, especially when you start looking at the gap between... Usually you also don't want to have a gap that is too large between the ones that are under and above the power curve. You know, to have some semblance of balance. The problem is that when you look at Nikke, the fucking gap between some of the best Nikkes and some of the not so good Nikkes, or even the average Nikke and the good Nikkes, is so hilariously wide. Even if you were to put it with the average Nikke, so I'm going to put the average Nikke in yellow, the gap between a good Nikke and the average Nikke is so hilariously wide that it makes you question what they're doing. And that is my gripe at the moment with the Nikke design. I love the game, but that is a big gripe that I have with the Nikke design. Absolutely massive gripe that I have with the Nikke design. Because it makes no sense to have such a hilarious gap. There'll be a 1000% true damage dealer in the next 5 patches. Maybe. Like, with the way they've been designing shit, it wouldn't surprise me anymore. Honestly. At this point, it just wouldn't surprise me. Non-OLSBS is stronger than 90% of the game. Yeah, exactly. Like, the gap between... Right, what you gotta see, right? I know I've been repeating right a lot. But let's just put a quote-unquote average Nikke. Meaning a Nikke that is not unusable, but that is not the best either. So you can take A2 as an example, or you can take, I don't know. You can take Sugar as an example of a more average-powered Nikke. They're not completely unusable, but once you compare, let's say, Sugar or A2 to fucking SBS or fucking SNEs, the gap is so hilariously large that it's barely funny. Like, even the gap between Soda and Sugar is so wide it's not even funny. And that's without going into the quote-unquote unusable Nikkes, which honestly, they're fucking unusable. Like D or freaking Epinel or whatever, right? That are borderline unusable, or Summer Neon. Like, okay. You look at Summer Neon, and then you look at Winter Ludmilla. You look at the gap in power between those two, and it makes you wonder why they didn't make Summer Neon the free SR of the thing. Because SSR, she's not an SR. She's absolutely not an SR. SSR, I mean. She's an SR disguised as a freaking SR. An SR disguised as an SSR. Her power level is on par with freaking SR Nikkes. It's that bad. Treasures will fix it. I mean, you wouldn't need to... Like, the treasure system is good. I'm actually happy that they added it. It's the most elegant solution to the current issue of the power gaps. The problem is they keep this flawed design where they keep making a massive power gap between Nikkes. And saying the treasure will fix it is kind of a fallacy in the sense that they could try to make good balance, like I said with the power curve, test their Nikkes a little bit more properly, because honestly, I genuinely doubt that they test their Nikkes properly. Have a better sense of balance within the power curve, and anything that is like an accident or that is like too far out there in one direction or the other, well, you can use the treasures to fix that. Absolutely. The problem is that they keep consistently releasing such wild variations that it just makes no sense. Like, sure, the treasure system can help, but please reduce the wild variations as well, because the existence of a band-aid fix, or calling it a band-aid fix might be a little bit harsh, but the reality is that it kind of is, because players need to spend time investing and doing just to fix a fucking unusable Nikke, right? You need to take time to do this, to fix an unusable Nikke, and they keep releasing wild shit. Why am I not even bothering getting the Laplace treasure? Because I probably won't even use her even if I get the treasure anyways. It's been such wild variations, and I thought they were listening, or rather learning, as Mitsu says, until I saw the clay kit. I was like, they're not learning. Like, how do you justify this type of... Like, unless there's something that I'm missing, right? Unless there's something that I'm wildly missing. There is currently no universe where clay will see proper use. Except like that one super weird niche scenario. At least for now. Unless they release some wildly super overpowered true damage Nikke that for some fucking reason cannot be supported by any of the top meta picks. Because that's the thing, right? Is that you can say, okay, they will release a 3 damage Nikke that is incredibly good and will push Clay up. No, the problem is that her kit, 40-second cooldown B2 supporter, with barely any multipliers in terms of support capabilities, unless for some reason they make it so that that 3 damage Nikke does not interact with the rest of the support cast, which is absolutely dogshit design, by the way. I absolutely hope they do not do that because that's a horrible idea. Any other meta pick is going to be better. If that thing is so overpowered, then you will just support her with Crown. If that thing is so overpowered and happens to be a rocket launcher, you will support her with Rem. If that thing is overpowered but loses HP or whatever and you need to heal her, you will use Blanc. If that thing can do a lot of core damage, you will use freaking Naga. There's no conceivable universe where Clay would be your first thought. And that is a problem. It just kind of pisses me off a little bit that they just don't try to balance them from the get-go. It's like, cool, yeah, you can fix them with treasures to some extent, but that's not a good solution. Absolutely not a good solution in terms of design. A crappy bandit solution is better than nothing. Fuck off right now. You have to make a boss that has a unique ability that is 1000% damage from blonde cheerleaders. Basically, they would need to make some sort of weird gimmick. Lets people skip and save for meta units. Yes and no. So this is another concept from Magic the Gathering. You need to make bad cards to let the good ones shine, but there's still power curve. And the main difference between Magic the Gathering and Nikke, for example, is that Magic, each set contains hundreds if not thousands of cards. You need an incentive for new players. The problem is that if there is a gap, what you gotta understand is that a lot of players are gonna be mad if they see one of their favorite characters, like Clay, for example, that was very looked forward to, be borderline unusable on any piece of content for people that actually care to play the game, and that are not treating it as a waifu collector situation. Because the ones that are waifu collectors will buy no matter what, and they will leave whenever the fuck they want. They will buy no matter what if it's a waifu that they care about. But it feels really bad for a lot of players if the Nikkes are just straight up unusable. The game balance-wise, the game is not in a healthy situation at the moment. There is a very specific subset of Nikkes that are monopolizing all the top slots, and many of the other Nikkes are just straight up unusable, and there's a lot of people that are pretty sad about that. Not being able to use your favorite Nikkes, even if it's for more niche scenarios, feels really crappy. You should ask all the people that were really happy to see Summer in Neon and that then saw how strong she was and now that she's permanently benched. Like, that's not a good feeling, and that's not marketing. That's the opposite of marketing. People are picking up the game. The only issue is the game isn't exactly new player friendly. The new player experience is not the worst. Now, the whole concept of catching up is basically non-existent in this game, if you think about it. Like, a brand new player, unless they wail to a ridiculous extent, is never going to catch up to me anymore. That's not going to happen, as long as I keep actively playing the game. The only new players that have been catching up to me are people that have been spending tens of thousands of dollars. They need a mentor-pupil system. That would be nice, yeah. That would absolutely be nice. That would be really, really nice. Drake got heavily phased out. Can't really use her. Yeah. Drake has a gacha skin. He's a very popular Nikke. She is only usable on very, 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 very niche scenarios in solo raid. Everywhere else, she's basically non-existent except maybe some Missilist Tower teams. I can't think that a lot of people are happy about that. But yeah, a mentor-pupil system would be nice, though. I gotta agree with you on that one, Tini. I don't trust the process. I give feedback on what is wrong because I know for a fact that developers can fuck up majorly without even realizing it. One of the games that I played for many, many, many years is World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft has been the top MMO almost continuously throughout its lifespan. It almost killed itself multiple times. And what I mean by kill itself is that at one point it almost killed itself so badly, Final Fantasy became the top MMO because of all the World of Warcraft players that left the game to Final Fantasy. So that's the reason why I give the feedback that I give. That's the reason why I share the opinions that I have. and the like. It's not about negativity. It's about, I like this game, and I know it has a lot of potential, and I know how great and amazing this game is. But I also know its flaws because I play it a lot and at a very competitive level. Like, I know a lot of its flaws. So I just want it to do better. I just want it to do better. The Genshin of the 2000s and early. Please don't compare my favorite MMO to a Genshin Impact. But yeah, the problem with, for example, World of Warcraft is that they would look at some feedback, but they were creating stuff so many years in advance that the flaws of the systems would only appear later on, and they would be too deep into new system based on those systems to rectify. And it created a feedback loop that created a very shit state that culminated in Shadowlands. So they made Base such an SS tier story character. I'm gonna make her usable in PvP. Like, Bey at least is usable in PvP. Like, in terms of, like, they make some amazing design Nikkes with some really interesting stories, and then sometimes you just cannot use them. I don't think Clay will be usable at all. Her kit is just, yeah. That's what I'm saying, right, Insanity, is that her kit is, at least for now, very disappointing. Unless Shift Up is cooking something behind the scenes with a very problematic type of design, by the way. You gotta see it this way, right? The issue is that if they make Nikkes with bad kits initially, but later down the road they make them OP because they added a new unit, you'll feel stupid for not having pulled here. So it creates a stupid form of FOMO. Now, you could say FOMO is nice because it boosts sales, but I can tell you that this negative feeling will just drive people away. It will just drive people away. There will come a point in time where they will just feel sick of this pattern of bad Nikke that then becomes OP because new Nikke gets released. Fortunately, we haven't really seen much of that, at least for now. But it is a pattern that I have seen in some gacha games and in some other games as well. And this essentially killed games. Absolutely killed games. The pattern should be make a decent to good, right? Or at least with potential, where you can see the potential. Like, where the potential is clearly visible. Either the potential is clearly visible, the character is at least decent or is good, and then more support comes to it later. This way you feel like you're future-proofing if you actually take it. Or you skip, but you know that there was the potential of this. If somehow they release a Nikke that makes Bey top-tier support, somehow, out of their ass through game design shenanigans, it's not a good pattern to have. That just feeds into the other things that I talked about, Mitsu, is that the power curve is not well managed in Nikke. It's hard to make a good Nikke when things like Red Hood and SBS exist, yes, because the power curve is very poorly managed. That's my entire point about the power curve in Nikke. The power curve is very mismanaged in Nikke. Now, the concept of the power curve, like I said, is something that you see in card games and in other things. You see a lot of talks about it in card games, though. So you take, for example, Hearthstone. Well, it's the mana cost. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And then how much impact they have. The expectation being that the more expensive the card, the higher impact it will have, right? And the lower cost the card, the lower impact it should have. Because otherwise, what is the point in having high-cost cards if a lower-cost card has significantly more impact, right? So the expectation is that it grows. What's really interesting is that 0 and 1 cost cards are ridiculously hard to balance because it's very hard to balance how cheap they are versus how much impact they're allowed to have. And that is why the 1 cost to 2 cost cards gap, that 1 mana, is huge when evaluating cards. Now, for Nikkes, you might be thinking, okay, what is about gacha games and Nikke and everything? Like, what am I referring to? Where in this case is how much investment you need, right? How much do you need to invest into it before you have impact? I'll refer to another game about that. You can think of it as League of Legends, for example. Vayne is very high investment for very high impact in certain metas of League of Legends. Versus, I don't know, what would be versus a Darius, for example, back in the day, like old Darius or whatever. Nowadays, it's a little bit of a mess. For Nikke, it's the same. It's how much overload, how much skills, etc. do you need to invest to have high impact, right? That's what I mean by investment. And then you can make a power curve out of it. The problem is that the power curve in Nikke is incredibly mismanaged at the moment. It's really, really all over the place. Yeah, Red Hood, SBS, Alice. Alice is a prime example of very high investment for incredibly high impact. She's the highest impact Nikke in the game if you put the highest investment into her. Like, there is no other Nikke that scales as well with investments. By the way, investment versus impact is what also helps determining what we call early game versus late game characters, for example. Or early game builds versus late game builds. That entire power curve translates into a lot of the different games. And it also translates into game balance. And that is one of the biggest flaws of Nikke right now, is their mismanagement of that power curve.